All right, it is officially noon, so welcome everyone. My name is Elena Whitaker. I'm a water and conservation educator with Iowa Learning Farms. And today we're joined with Andrew Rust, who's with the Nature Conservancy, and he's going to be talking about Iowa's Oxbows Reborn, bringing life back to one of Iowa's vital ecosystems. If you have any questions for Andrew, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them all at the end. So feel free to put them in throughout his presentation. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand things over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Elena. Hi, everyone, and happy Wednesday. As Elena said, my name's Andrew Rust, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the freshwater restoration specialist at the Nature Conservancy. And I work in our priority watersheds across Iowa to restore wetlands. And specifically, what I work on is with Oxbow wetland restorations. And so I'm excited to share with you some information on Oxbow restorations. Whatever knowledge level you're at, I hope you take something away and know a little more about Oxbows. So here we go. So the information in this presentation is adapted from a toolkit that was created several years ago. There was a growing need to align the information for Oxbow restorations because it was a fairly new conservation practice. All different organizations were doing the practice, and there was a growing need to align on this information. And so this Oxbow Restoration Toolkit was created. It was created in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, and Iowa Soybean Association, along with the Nature Conservancy. And it was actually funded by a grant from the Iowa DNR's Resource Enhancement and Protection Program. And this resource is free and downloadable online. My best, I would say just go to Google and type in Oxbow Restoration Toolkit to find it, but you can find it on the Nature Conservancy's website, and specifically where our Iowa page. Also within this page, there's a 3-hour recorded virtual training for those who might be interested in more of an in-depth look into Oxbow restorations. And so I'll be kind of covering some of the basics, but this goes much more in depth and is a little more technical and is presented on by someone much more knowledgeable of me on the practice. And so just another resource for you to take a look at. And recently, the information gathered from the Oxbow Restoration Toolkit and all the information known by the conservation organizations working on this practice came together, and we came out with a peer-reviewed article on the Oxbow restoration practice, kind of a how-to methods article that was peer-reviewed. And so that was just a great feather in the cap to make sure what we were talking about was backed in science. And so we learned a lot through this process. And so through this, we'll be updating the toolkit by what we learned. But this was just a great way to reach international audiences, national, and get the word out about the great work that we're doing here in Iowa on Oxbow restorations. So what is an oxbow? I'm sure some of you will know, some of you might not be as familiar, but it's actually an agricultural term from the 14th century. Essentially, cattle needed to be connected to a yoke to pull, things like plows and wagons, other things. But it's a collar put on cattle, U-shaped, connected to the yoke. But this was, I think, in the late 1700s, was adapted into kind of a stream term. And it's essentially, as you can see from this graphic, over time, streams meander, they shift course as they erode and deposit sediment. And so an oxbow is formed by two meanders cutting towards each other, ultimately forming this meander neck. And during some high flow event, such as a flood, going for that path of least resistance and forming that oxbow lake. And these oxbow lakes have a unique habitat for certain species, and I'll talk about that in a little later. But they provide such good benefits to all the different species of vegetation and wildlife And so, yeah, in Iowa, we're home to lots of oxbows. And when I'm identifying oxbows in the landscape, I'm taking a look at historic imagery. So you can look back to the 1930s, but you can see here in the 1950s, this stream was meandering. And then over time, the energy, ultimately that meander neck formed and they cut towards each other. And ultimately, during some flooding event, they cut off there and then isolating that upper area. And if you're looking at 2008 imagery, you may even not even know, there was an oxbow there. So that's why historic imagery is super helpful. And this was an actual restoration that we went ahead and went forward with back in 2013. I will also say LiDAR is extremely helpful when I'm looking at identifying oxbows. So that can be helpful in identifying those depressions in the landscape. And so that's one of the main, if those who use GIS, one of the main layers I use is LiDAR and compare it to the modern day imagery. This is that same restoration, but on the ground level. You can see the before picture. This oxbow is filled in with sediment. Looks like it might be providing some wetland benefit, but not the maximum benefit. And so we went ahead and worked with a contractor to excavate out that sediment. You can see it's holding much more water now after that excavation. And then the after, it's just holding much more water, providing benefits for wildlife, water quality, flood retention benefits, and you name it. The opportunity in Iowa is great. There's likely over tens of thousands of potential restorations across the state, located on public and private property. We've done both. Um, these are often great for outdoor recreation as well. So landowners who are interested in things such as fishing, hunting, wildlife viewing, and photography, these fit really well in with your interests. And then, of course, the environmental benefits. The wildlife value is huge. I'll talk about that a little later, as well as the water quality benefits and the flood benefits. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some mapping I've done of some watersheds, just to give you a sense of the scale at which oxbows are present in the landscape. So this is some mapping that I did of the Boone River watershed in north central Iowa, where we've done somewhere between 50 and 60 restorations in the last decade. But this represents 400 dots, not all of which can be restored. I've already gone through and prioritized these, but there's a lot of oxbows out there. And then on a larger scale, I did some mapping of some of our priority watersheds, which is the Cedar River and the Wapsie River watersheds, which are some of our priorities for wetland restorations. And this is 3,500 dots. And I've done some level of prioritization of these and narrowed it down to about 1,300 that may be worth looking into further. And I also want to say I'm happy to share this information out with any people who would be information who would like the shape files for it. I can clip it to a watershed, to a county, whatever you need. I'd be happy to do that for you. And I'm already doing that for many actually. And so just want to get the word out about it. One of the major reasons why we restore oxbows and we also and we have specific regions where we do oxbow restorations because of the Topeka shiner, which is found in watersheds such as the Boone River watershed, North Raccoon watershed, and up in northwest Iowa, the Rock River watershed. And so Topeka shiner really thrive in these backwater pool habitats such as oxbows. And we found huge success in restoring this feature. And they're making a comeback, which is super exciting. The Fish and Wildlife Service is recommending upgrading Topeka shiner from endangered to threatened because of this sort of practice. And so it's pretty exciting to see. And this is an example of what a degraded, oxbow looks like. It's filled in with sediment. Maybe it does flood and fill with water at some point, but it dries out quick because it doesn't have that depth to it. And so any sort of species, aquatic species that get in there die off pretty quick and dry because of the it drying out and everything. And so we find dead fish, and so it's just a great opportunity to come in and enhance that oxbow and excavate out that sediment. So it's holding the maximum amount of water as possible. Take a drink of water here. And then the water quality benefits are huge within oxbow restorations. We can actually tile feed oxbows, so route the tile into the oxbow rather than the adjacent stream. So then any sort of nitrates within that water can have time to be treated before it actually gets into the stream. And so some research that has been done has found a reduction of 62% of nitrates export from field that are deposited into oxbows, which is pretty exciting. And it shows just the incredible power of these oxbows provide for the water quality benefit. The wildlife value, which really excites me, and is where the Nature Conservancy really focuses on. We work with Fish and Wildlife Service to do surveys at these restorations, and we'll often find for those that connect to the adjacent stream from some flooding event, we find thousands of fish. We found 57 species of fish, including the endangered Topeka shiner, as well as 71 species of birds, as well as lots of different frogs, mammals, and other species. And so they're just an incredible habitat for lots of different species. When deciding whether to restore an oxbow, there are a lot of different considerations to take into account. So what's the historic land use, current land use, and future land use? Those are all important factors to take into account into seeing, what's the longevity of this oxbow going to be. Take, for example, say it's located on someone's land and they're not sure they might farm this area in the future, might fill in the wetland, come back and farm it. That might not be the best place for an oxbow. So we really want to allow the oxbow to last as long as possible into the future, just to make sure, no one's going to come in and remove it or fill it back in. We really want to keep those benefits as long as possible. Another consideration are, what sort of resource concerns are there or specific goals associated with this oxbow? And for us, we have the Topeka shiner that we're is one of our goals. Others are focused on water quality, so tile fed oxbows. Different funding sources have different priorities. Some have to be tile fed, some can be tile fed or not tile fed. Some have specific species they're going after. So those are just some different considerations. And other considerations include what level of degradation is the oxbow at? So is it functioning as a wetland currently, but could use some enhancement? Is it upland currently, where you can do a full restoration? Is it in an area that's just going to receive a ton of sedimentation and won't last into the future as long? And then another consideration that can be really difficult or costly is the access. So are there a bunch of trees for equipment that makes access challenging? And what other logistical challenges are there? Like elevation is huge, topography. All these things are extremely important to take into consideration. So when oxbows follow a cyclical pattern, so they start out at the bottom as the main part of the channel, and they move to a flowing side channel to an oxbow slough, meaning they're still connected to the adjacent stream, but they're starting to, that oxbow is starting to form. And then it forms that oxbow lake, which is completely separate from the stream. And then it fills in with sediment, forming that upland. And so there can be different conservation strategies at different stages, and I'll go into that here in a sec here. And so going to talk a little about levels of degradation and what sort of conservation strategies might be a good idea to do. And so say, you have an oxbow that you're uncertain about, you don't know, is it already providing good habitat? Is it filling with water, year round or partial year? If you're uncertain about it, it's good to just monitor that site for a year. And after that year, you might be able to come up with some ideas of how you might be able to enhance it. And so that's a good strategy if you're uncertain. If there's some minimal to moderate sedimentation or vegetation or habitat degradation, one strategy can be to enhance the vegetation there. And so that can include, tree control, invasive species removal, haying, grazing, things like that to improve that native vegetation and habitat value of that area. In addition to, and the similar stage, minimal, moderate sedimentation, but there's some erosion going on with the connection channel. Some considerations could be to do a grade stabilization or a plug to allow for the water to really stay within that oxbow. And at the same minimal to moderate sedimentation and habitat degradation, it could need just a connection enhancement by digging out the connection channel to allow to it connect to the adjacent stream better and easier, allowing for water to get in there and for any species and aquatic species to get in there as well. And at the highest level of degradation, moderate and excessive sedimentation, the strategy is a full restoration. And so digging out that sediment down to the historic stream bed, connecting it to the water table, and providing the maximum habitat for fish, wildlife, and others. So, say you've got a landowner on board, they're interested in doing the restoration. When doing a site visit, it's really important to take into consideration these things on the right here. These are what I'm looking at when I'm at a site, looking at, is there a connection channel? Is there an adjacent farm field where a tile could be outlaid? I'm looking at tree removal possibilities, which can increase cost and other things. And also working with that landowner because they know the land very well. So asking good questions can all go a long way in having an effective restoration. And then the restoration cost, it really varies by contractor, by site, in a lot of things. And so these are just some estimates, but the costs associated are with excavation, mobilization, tree removal, and seeding. These are all things that go into the cost of the oxbow restoration. There's a lot of different sources of funding for oxbow restorations. A couple are with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has it, Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, private funding, us, the Nature Conservancy, Iowa Soybean Association, NRCS. These are all people who fund oxbows. And so I recommend going to these partners or your local conservation, office and just seeing what's out there for your specific region or locality. And yeah, Oxbow funding is underutilized across the state. And so just something to keep in mind. So when I'm at a site, I'm taking survey shots of the Oxbow to get a lay of the landscape, which taking these numbers, the elevations, I'm able to make a design to get the most accurate, just estimate of the spoil, how much spoil there's going to be, which is important for the contractor. So I'll take, cross sections of the Oxbow, take shots of the stream connection just to see whether or not we need to excavate it out. Is it already a good connection? Taking that stream thalweg, the bottom of the stream, because that basically we'll be taking out that oxbow to the bottom of the adjacent stream. It's usually about the same as that. And also really helpful is if you have it, taking a soil core sample within the bottom of the oxbow and seeing how far down that gravel layer is. And that's the most accurate way, I would say, of getting the most accurate depth that you're going to need to dig. Also with design, the goal is not to cause channel shifts. So placing oxbows in areas that are not receiving direct head flows, setting back oxbows from outer curves, um, and avoiding areas, yeah, where there's tree overhang because leaf litter cannot be great for species and even cause, low oxygen and potentially fish kills. And those are just some considerations, very technical considerations. But also important are permits. So have to go through the Iowa DNR, their permit system, and the Army Corps of Engineers, the RRS system to get permits. And then also making sure to check with your local county or city for any floodplain permits that are needed. Those are all critical things you need to do. Um, and that does take the most time, as permits usually do. And I'll talk about that in a sec here. So working with contractors is critical. And so there are contractors out there who are very familiar with the practice, but a lot who are not. And so it's important to get good competitive bids, get at least three to get the best bang for your buck. Setting clear expectations is really important. Um, and just being on site for that contractor, make sure they know what they're doing, is really important. Um, Yep, being flexible is extremely important with Oxbow restorations. Pretty much every restoration is different, and unexpected things happen almost every time. And so, yeah, sometimes you may need to dig deeper, and that means shortening the restoration, just doing the math, just to make sure you're not um, overusing that contractor or doing more than what they said. This is just a general timeline. It really varies, but you can see the permits generally take a little while submitting them, but then it takes a little time for them to review. But this is just a general timeline. And then monitoring is critical to know, yeah, what are the benefits of this restoration? So monitoring, doing water quality monitoring. We work with the Fish and Wildlife Service to do fish monitoring. And there's a lot of research opportunity out there for oxbow restorations, and we're learning more and more every day and every year about, yeah, just through research. So it's pretty exciting. With that, that's everything. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And looks like I'll probably go through those questions. I'm guessing Elena first or the
Yes, yes, perfect. So if you are attending and you would like a CCA CEU, go ahead and email me, alenaw@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar if it's different, and your CCA number. So again, to alenaw@iastate.edu. Go ahead and advance to the next one. If you are tuning in and you'd like to fill out our voluntary demographic survey, we only need one per year. So if you've already filled it out from our previous two webinars this year so far, you're good to go. But if you're joining new and you could fill out our voluntary demographic survey, we'd appreciate it. The next one, please. You can join us next week. We're going to be joined by Dr. Joshua Peschel talking about practical robotics and conservation. So that should be really exciting. And I think there was maybe one more. Oh, we got two more slides still. You can find all of our webinar. They're all recorded in our archives. You can either find them on our website, iowalearningfarms.org/webinars, or on our YouTube channel if you just look up Iowa Learning Farms webinars on YouTube. And then I've got one more slide. Tomorrow, join us. We've got a virtual field day, our first one of 2025, and it's going to be about unlocking the potential of saturated grass waterways for nutrient reduction. So again, that's tomorrow, Thursday, January 23rd at 1 p.m. It's with Keith Schilling, Matthew Streeter, Jen Merriman, and Clark Porter. So go ahead and join that. All right, now we have a bunch of questions, Andrew, in the chat box. So I'll go ahead and get started with one of the first ones, which was the Topeka Shriners that you're then finding in these restored oxbows. Did you reintroduce them, or they found there naturally after so many months or a year following the restoration?
Yeah, we didn't reintroduce them. They were already in the land, but as we restore these oxbows slowly and slowly, they've made a comeback, and so they've naturally made that comeback, not reintroduction. That's a good question.
Another is how do you decide or know the depth of each oxbow?
Yeah, so how I find the depth of the oxbow is by looking at the adjacent creek and stream and just taking survey shots of that. And then I take a survey shot of the bottom of the oxbow. And from that, that's around the comparing those two. Um, basically, where that stream bottom is where that oxbow bottom will likely be. But sometimes that's not the case. And so that's why taking a soil core is really nice too, in order to get the most accurate information. So,
Another question that's dealing with the physical restoration. They're saying that excavation can sometimes remove the previously poor permeable soils and expose then alluvial well-drained layers, um, which would then result in the oxbow not holding on to surface water as well. Do you ever stockpile the top layer that was poorly drained, or do you add bentonite to the backfill or anything like that?
hmm, that's a great question. I'm not as familiar with that, so I'm sorry. I'm sure there's someone on the webinar who can answer that better, or participants who can answer that better than me. I'm not as familiar with the soil stuff. Um, that's a great question.
So we've got a lot of questions about um, the uh, nitrate reduction. So a lot of people are under the assumption that for nitrate reduction to happen, it needs that the oxbow would be anaerobic. And then so how does a restored oxbow support small fish if it needs to have anaerobic conditions for nitrate reduction?
Hmm. You say that one more time, Elena?
Yeah, they're saying that for nitrate reduction to be happening, that typically uh, anaerobic conditions are needed for nitrate to be removed. And so, how then, if conditions in the oxbow are anaerobic, is the oxbow supporting small fish like the Topeka Shiner?
That's a great question. I honestly couldn't answer that. That's a great question. Maybe it's an obvious answer that I should know, but yeah, something I'm gonna write down.
To figure out later. Perfect.
Yeah.
Um, there are some more questions. Hold on here. Was the 62% of that nitrate removal relative to the drains outputting into the streams?
That was um, that's a great question, and that shows I should go look at the research paper. I can't tell you off the top of my head where it was taken from outputting into the stream. Um, but just to be safe, I would say go look at the research. Can it's Keith Schilling and
I,
from the University of Iowa. So
yep,
yep.
and I can add there. Andrew and Karen chimed in there as well. But from reviewing the multi-purpose oxbow research relative to the nutrient reduction strategy, that nitrate reduction is looking at what's coming into the oxbow from the tile, and then what's leaving that oxbow through whatever mechanism there's some um, flow into the stream. And yeah, that research was conducted by the Iowa Soybean Association and Keith Schilling at the University of Iowa in partnership with TNC, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
And
thanks,
and there
Matt.
was a question that asked about those anaerobic conditions. That anaerobic condition would be present in the benthic zone with the sediments at the bottom of that oxbow, but there would be oxygen available in the water profile of the oxbow.
Hmm.
Perfect. Yeah,
So
that makes
thanks,
sense.
Rob, for answering that. Yep.
Yeah,
Perfect.
thanks for helping out.
Yeah, no
Thanks,
problem.
Matt.
Yeah.
So some other questions are, the Topeka Shiner. So, what does it mean when you said that they were found in the land? Like, was it their eggs? Were the Topeka Shiners, did the Oxbow kind of already have some water there, just wasn't operating at its full capacity, and there were Topeka Shiners there? Or you'd mentioned that you're not introducing
Right.
Topeka Shiners. They're already there. How were they already there?
Yeah, well, going way back long ago, there were these backwater pools everywhere, lots of oxbows where these Topeka Shiner were at. But as landscape changes happened, agriculture, these filling in of these wetlands, streams were straightened, that sort of thing. That habitat for the Shiner were reduced greatly. So they were still there, um, within, say, the Boone River watershed area. And so there's still oxbows, those backwater pools where they can survive, but not many. And so they were still there. But then as we've gradually added more and more of those oxbows into the landscape, they're making a comeback. So I hope that answered the question and that makes sense. If I didn't, I'm sorry, but
I should we Elena and I should unmute Karen Wilkie with the Nature Conservancy because Karen's done some of this work and Karen chimed in there too that and some of them will get back in there when we have flooding that brings it that may bring that from the stream into the
yep,
to that area. She says no, she doesn't. I don't need to unmute her, but I just thought I'd chime in.
yeah. Thanks, Karen.
So this is a question about the funding for Oxbow. So you mentioned that there is a lot of Oxbow funding and that it's underutilized. Is it earmarked specifically for Oxbow restoration, or is it in competition with other conservation practices like buffer installation, cover crops, things like that?
There is, um, let's see. That's a great question. I'm not sure if I know exactly how to answer that. Um, Karen's on the call. She can help.
Yep.
A lot of people are saying it depends on the funding source, and there
Yeah.
is though specifically like a separate group for Oxbow or wildlife habitat.
Hmm.
And that if it's funding from idols, it is tile-fed oxbows only.
Right. Yes.
Multi-purpose. Yep.
The
Yep.
multi-purpose
Yep.
ones, yes.
Hmm.
Um, do, do, do. Scrolling through the chat. Has the Nature Conservancy done any oxbow restorations outside its priority watershed areas? Um, and do you know of an organization that works in the Des Moines River watershed?
Well, we've done oxbow restorations within the Des Moines River watershed. I believe. Um, I can't think of off the top of my head who's working in there, and that's another Karen question. So Karen, if you have any knowledge about that, but as far as the question outside of our priority watersheds, so our priorities are like the Boone River watershed. We have different priorities based on for wetlands, for stream restoration, other things, but the cedar, the Wapsie, yeah, we do work in the Des Moines River watershed, North Raccoon. Um, Trying to think, I can't think of one that we've done outside of like the area that we've prioritized. Um, yeah.
Perfect. And yeah, so again, just make sure you're contacting your local NRCS office is a great place to start checking
Hmm.
for IDOLS, NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Services, all those things that you mentioned earlier. One
Yep.
person was asking if you could, hold on, let me find that question. Could you describe again the data that you have for the Cedar River watershed? So you'd mentioned on that one slide that you have like 3,500 points. I think they were just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about that data.
Yeah. So I went through went through the Cedar River watershed, and I essentially, yeah, just went through. I looked at LiDAR. I looked back at historic imagery, back to 1930s. And I went through that watershed and looked at, it was mainly LiDAR, and then comparing it with modern day imagery and just seeing where these oxbows are in the landscape. And so I basically put a point on each oxbow I found, and and I did a little bit of prioritization. Essentially, if an oxbow was within an area that's completely forested in, I didn't really take that into consideration, put that as a priority. But if I can see it from a satellite view, I can see clearly the oxbow there, and that it looks like a potentially a good one to visit. I marked that and prioritized, and so that was the 1300 that I prioritized from that 3500. Those 1300 were ones that are like, yeah, not a ton of tree cover. The access is okay, and so they're worth looking at a little further. So yeah.
Do your designs simply have one access point at the downstream end, or do you design with an upstream connection as well as with diversions? So just downstream, or do you do some upstream connections as well?
Um, Say downstream. Um, I wouldn't just because of what I said in the presentation, if you're taking on that head flow, it can cause erosion. And so having it downstream when possible is the best and what we do. So yeah.
Perfect. Do. What is a question? Sorry. There were a lot of questions in the chat, everyone. It's hard to look through
Yeah.
today. Is there a standard that you follow when designing these? They mentioned that the NRCS has a style of standards that they follow for most other engineering conservation practices. Is there one that you all follow for oxbow restoration?
So yeah, different agencies have different standards. Basically, we want to get down to that oxbow bottom. So digging down to the gravel layer, that's really the most important thing. And kind of what's exciting I like about it is it can be so creative with oxbow restorations and following some principles, making sure there's a connection, if it's to make sure it's getting a good connection, adding that in. And standards for, say, Topeka Shiner habitat, the oxbow should be a quarter acre or less, just to make sure we're not introducing any larger species that can out compete it. Those are just a couple examples of standards we use just to make sure we're catering to certain species or designing and then also, yeah, with relation to like the adjacent stream, putting in a place that's not going to, sediment in too quick. Those are just some of the standards or best practices, I guess, that we use. So there's more, but yeah, those are just some.
Kind of along that line again of design, someone is asking what are the appropriate slopes for the sides of an oxbow?
Mhm.
Because is like the outside bend having be nearly vertical, is that possible? Or does like it cause issues in constructability and things like that? Like what are the ideal slopes?
Yeah, generally 3 to 1 is what we go off of. But for example, we can put oxbows in pasture land, and with that, you want to have more gentle slopes. You could do 4 to 1, just so cattle aren't. So they have the more gentle slope to get down. But we do go steeper, 2 to 1. Because kind of what our thinking is like that's what the historic stream is, very stream, very heavy or very sharp. And so we want to mimic that historic, but it could erode faster for sure. And so we generally do 3 to 1 is what we do. Yep. Sometimes different, but
Perfect. And Karen Wilkie had also commented that there is in their toolkit that the Nature Conservancy has designed, there is a
yes.
template for design. So if people are
Yep.
interested, you
Yep.
can look in that. Um, Back to those points on the Cedar River and Raccoon River, they're asking when identifying the points. Was there any automated portion of the workflow, for example, using ACPF or a different GIS model, things like that?
Funny enough, Karen and I were just meeting with our GIS guy at for the Nature Conservancy talking about this very thing. And there is some automation out there for Oxbows, but um, what's been found thus far is that it's not quite as accurate as, say, a human going through and mapping these Oxbows. But that's not to say that it's in the future we'll be able to do it much more accurately. Our GIS person said essentially takes a while to train that, like say AI models to do this, and it's at the scale that I'm doing my mapping at. It may be quicker to just map it on my own versus training, say, an AI model to do it. But that's actually something I'm really excited about and want to dive into more into the future. And so I hope there's more people looking into that. And so great question.
Um, Another question we have is in for oxbows that are in forested areas, just in terms of maintenance, would it be beneficial then to open up the canopy around it to maintain them?
If there is one in the forested area, yeah, you'd want to have as much of a buffer from those trees from the from the oxbow. Again, that's going to cost a lot of money, just a lot of trees to remove. It's just yeah, logistically difficult. But if you do it, try to leave trees as far away from the oxbow, just because things such as leaf litter can cause fish kills and reduce the oxygen within that water, and you really don't want that. So yeah.
Okay. All right. That looks like most or all of the questions. I think I got them all today. So I'm sure if there are more questions, people can send them on your way. But yes, so we've added in the chat, we've added links to the toolkit, links to the research paper, if people want to access those. Otherwise, thank you, Andrew, for joining today. I know I personally learned a lot. So, and guests, again, you can join us next week for practical robotics and conservation. And if you need a CCA, go ahead and email me by 5 o'clock today. And with that, if you've got any last words, Andrew, feel free.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. And this is my contact information. If you want any information, want to learn more, feel free to reach out. But I'm happy to talk. So yeah, thanks everyone.